Over the past several months, I've heard a great deal about religious exemption. And most of those references were in relation to whether or not an individual can claim a religious exemption from taking the COVID-19 vaccination. But before we get too far into this video, I want to make abundantly clear that this video isn't about COVID-19 or vaccinations of any kind, but rather this idea of religious exemption caused me to consider more deeply the things from which we, as followers of Jesus, are exempt. The question was driven home even more when this week in our Wednesday evening Bible study, we read from Mark chapter 9. And towards the end of the chapter, Jesus, talking to his disciples, mentions in verse 49 that, quote, everyone will be salted with fire. Now, what Jesus is probably doing here is warning his disciples about the trials and hardships everyone faces, even them. At this point in his ministry, he's already mentioned a couple of different occasions what is ultimately going to happen to him. And this is his way of warning his disciples about what they will experience. Or in other words, things from which they will not be exempt. Christians throughout history have always been called to be a unique and distinct people. But somewhere along the way, especially in our modern culture, we begin to assume that uniqueness automatically gives us a place of privilege or authority that created for many an attitude of superiority or perhaps exemption. The idea that because we are Christians, our lives should inevitably be filled with success, blessing, and prosperity, and we shouldn't have to deal with things like struggle and difficulty, trials and persecutions. And if we did experience those things, then there was something wrong or missing in our faith. But where did we get this idea that we were exempt from hardship or struggle? I don't believe that it was from Scripture, because if we truly looked at Scripture, specifically Jesus' ministry and Paul's teachings, what we see is that we're exempt from things like putting my wants above the needs of others. We see that in Philippians 2, verse 3. Or we're exempt from refusing to protect the most vulnerable in our midst. We see that in Matthew 25:40 when we read that whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. We're also exempt from things like claiming an attitude of superiority over anyone else. Matthew 20, verse 28 says that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. So if Jesus himself chose not to exempt himself from service and hardship and suffering, and again taught his disciples to follow his example, and he warned them that following him would be difficult, what makes us think that we as the people of God today are exempt from these same principles? In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus talks about a narrow and a wide gate. He says, wide is the gate and broad is the road. The easy road leads to destruction. But small is the gate and narrow is the road, the harder road, which leads to life. Now, my hope for us is that we choose the small gate and the narrow road that doesn't exempt us from the tough spots of life. But rather, in the midst of them, we experience God's grace and are transformed in a way that brings joy and hope and power and life in the midst of those things. And as we experience them, they're not just for us, but also for others around us, those who are desperately searching for help in the midst of their own tough spots of life. Now, I hope everyone is doing well. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. But as always, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to let us know. I also look forward to worshiping with you all either on site or online beginning at 8:30 on Sunday morning. Have a great rest of the day, and God bless.